Yes, I did, without any awareness of sponsors or venue or anything. I said, of course I'll come to Serbia. Who wouldn't want to come visit Serbia? And I only questioned this decision after about 20 odd hours of flying to get here. But no, but it's been nice. I had the food here is fantastic. I had wonderful dinner last night, followed by a couple gallons of nice local beer. So welcome, everyone. You should all feel pretty excited that you're part of something absolutely brand new. The first time Meet Magento comes to Serbia. Actually, the reason I said yes is because the Meet Magento organization is it's a completely independent thing. This isn't a Magento event. This is put on by the community, really for the benefit of the community and for all of the merchants out there. And I knew when it was pitched to me that, yes, it would be good because it's a Meet Magento event. So that's why, one of the reasons why I'm here. Now, at some point I should have slides up. I don't really need them. I mean, sweet. That's my contact information. This also is my contact information. If you get nothing else out of a presentation from me, please at least know how to contact me. Very often, I'm not the person that you need to speak with. If you have a question of Magento, if you have a question about the product, if you have a question about the services or support, I'm not the person to give you the answer, but I know who can give you the best answer. And so just get in touch with me, and I'll get you in touch with them. I literally was doing this just a moment ago. So yeah, please always feel free to reach out to me. That's part of my job, is being here to be contactable. So why am I spending so much time on the road these days? Well, because we have Magento 2 now. Yay. It was, if you don't know, it was a very long time in the making. How many people have been working with Magento 1 for like more than 5 years here? Good number. Very good number. How many of you are merchants here today? Not so many. Very cool, except Niels. All right. I started working with Magento in 2008. I was working at an agency. I was just a developer. That you can tell I'm a developer because I'm wearing the international developer uniform. This is my formal hoodie. It's my going out hoodie. So I started working as a developer, and this was full stack day. This was like taking Photoshop compositions and slicing them up, and that's how I taught myself Magento. And I think the story is very similar for a lot of people. Someone says, hey, let's use Magento. And you say, I'm a developer, I can figure it out. And then you spend a couple weeks figuring it out. I spent about 2 months figuring it out. And that's really the arc of how things went with Magento 1. And the interesting thing was it blew up. Like Magento was released. I don't know if you remember, if you go back far enough, like the reason we have Magento is because there was this web agency in Los Angeles, and they were doing increasingly bigger and bigger projects, and they just, with some very capable developers, but they just absolutely could not support those installations anymore. They were building it with this thing called OS Commerce. Who remembers OS Commerce? Anyone? Yeah. This the head nods of pain. Yes, we remember. OS Commerce was was a community. OS Commerce I first encountered back in like 2003, and I remember thinking, this is awesome. I can just grab this software and it's just a store and it's amazing. And unfortunately, that's how I learned programming, was from OS Commerce. And if you've ever been inside there, you understand that it's just basically a pure functional hell. you can't really do much to the core without breaking the upgrade path, which was okay because I think 2.2 was around for 9 years, but it was very brittle. And so this company said, hey, you know, what's really needed? There hasn't been any real innovation here in a long time. I mean, you had offshoots of OS Commerce, but they really hadn't made big strides. So what they did was smart. They had some guys who knew Java, and they had them build a PHP framework to their own specifications so that they could then use that to build an application, an e-commerce application. And then they positioned it as open source, and that's how Magento was born. And if you go back, on the Internet Archive, you can see some of the original blog posts about like them being excited. They were thrilled to have 50,000 downloads of this thing way back in the early days. We're already over 250,000 downloads of Magento 2 in almost no time. But really, for me, where I think we see the difference in the arc from Magento 1 to Magento 2 is you think about the size of this ecosystem that we have, the fact that we have education, so forth. $50 billion flowed through Magento-powered commerce last year. 50 billion with a B. I mean, if this were my mic, I would just drop it. but it's not. We're in a different position with Magento 2 than we are with Magento 1, and that's a good thing. Magento 2 came along because, you know, after starting our beta back in 2014, we wanted to get to the point where we had a new product that could solve some of the things that came up with Magento 1. So, I want to be very clear. I love me some Magento 1. I love opening up Magento 1. It seems so simple now after working with Magento 2. Like it just seems so warm and familiar. For me though, there were a lot of rough edges when working with Magento 1. There were user interface issues for sure. I've done a lot of teaching for Magento U, and this first bullet here, improved admin. I teach this one course called Managing Your Magento Store, and it is designed to work with store administrators and show them the interface. And a lot of times, people are brand new coming into Magento and they're taking this class. And I would always explain to them, I'd say, now I want you to understand that this administration interface was built by a developer. Like, there weren't any user experience personnel involved or harmed in the making of the Magento 1 admin. That's one of the many things. Let's see, what else? We have this curious thing that happened also in the last, you think about it, Magento 1 comes out in 2008, and it is 2016. That's a long time in the world of programming. So programming changed a lot as well. And what I would experience when I go around to conferences, like PHP conferences, is people coming up and asking me, like, why does Magento do this way? This is so old. And I would have to say, well, yeah, it's 7 years old. It's 8 years old. Magento 2 was initially developed in 2007. So we had to modernize a lot about how the framework was built, just to bring it up to modern standards. So we did all of this in one fell swoop, right? Because we carried Magento 1 for quite a long time, and if you're curious, Magento 1 support continues on through 2018, through the end of 2018. So you have some time to make the switch to cut over to Magento 2. But I would get started sooner rather than later, because we're about to have our 2.1 release. Should be out very shortly. So you're going to see some new features coming in, and then you're going to see that we're going to regularly release new versions of Magento 2 that provide more features. Right, so let's take a look at some of these admin changes. Now, I'm not presenting off of my laptop, so I won't be able to pull up the admin panel itself. But how many of you have already spun up an instance of Magento 2 and are playing with it? That's good. That's really good. I didn't used to see so many hands earlier this year. More and more, I think people are playing with it. Imagine if you're a merchant, especially let's say specifically you are a merchandiser, right? So your job is every day essentially you have to go in to the admin panel and do specific tasks. That's one of the things that we wanted to do was make a lot of those tasks easier. For example, one of the things that one of the sort of the common user journeys through the admin is, okay, log in, go to catalog page, get a list of products, generate a specific list of products, and I have to do that every single day. So one of the things that we wanted to do was provide admin users with the ability to save those filters and those sort orders, save those views, and be able to call them up again. Another common requirement is needing more information than comes by default out of the box in that grid. Developers, how many of you have had to add a column to the product grid? I know I have 100 times. It's so much fun, isn't it? So we improved modularity there, right, from at a programmatic level. But we also built an entire user interface and architecture so that admin users themselves can simply add new attributes to that column, and they can move things around. These sound like simple, basic things, but these really have an impact on the user experience when you start multiplying that by, oh, this is something I have to do every single day, or I have to think about this and just take time to do it every day. We also built the interface to be touch-friendly, so you have nice touch targets, because that's another thing that's changed. It's not just how developers develop that's changed in the last 8 years. It's also people are walking around with iPads. I mean, think about it. 2007, not many of us were walking around with iPads. I'm going to go ahead and put that out there as a fact. So store owners want to be able to walk around and do things on an iPad. So this was another area of improvement for us. One of the other things that was really important is the performance in the admin panel. So we actually have, as part of our development criteria, part of the acceptance criteria is that given certain hardware, a catalog of like 1 million SKUs, if you perform a filter on that, those results should return within a certain time frame. So this is kind of on our mind as we're developing and part of the story. As opposed to just building a feature and just sort of saying, hey, this functionality is here, we say, hey, it's here and it works quickly. Now, performance. There are some performance white papers out there. We're taking a look. So performance is kind of an ongoing story. Now, I'll go ahead and share something with you. Magento 2 is bigger than Magento 1 as a code base. The application has more to do, more to calculate. So we built in certain assumptions about server configuration. Namely, we took full page caching and put it in the core and say, hey, if you're running a Magento 2 instance, guess what? You should be running Varnish. I think, Yaroslav, you're going to have some things to say about performance a little later on. I highly recommend coming to, you're saying good things, right? Okay, good. Well, so probably you should go to Yaroslav's presentation. So the idea is that, in general, though, we need performance. Magento 2 has to be faster than Magento 1, right? It has to be. We can't release a slower product because we know the data is absolutely conclusive that performance, sort of poor performance, lowers conversion dramatically. It lowers your ranking in search engines. It's generally a bad thing to not perform well. So we built Magento 2 with a production mode that, with all caching enabled, is faster than Magento 1. But that said, it's not a finished story. So we're going to continue working on. We'll kind of continue to put engineering effort towards performance, especially as people are using Magento and finding, oh, hey, when I have, this many customers and then this many price groups, et cetera, this is the impact. That's the kind of feedback we need to help improvements happen. But this story was an interesting story. It actually, I was scared out of my mind back in the beginning of last year, 2015. Because Marco, who I think is now formerly of Inshu, he did some testing, performance testing, and wrote a blog post and said, "Wow, Magento 2 is impossibly slow, and I don't know how they can fix it." This is great news to wake up to one day. And then we had some developer beta interactions. We put a lot of our engineers onto this story. I mean, we hadn't really started down that optimization path yet. So the great thing was that he then, after all of our effort, he then had to write a follow-up blog post last June that said, "Wow, they fixed it. I don't know how, but they fixed it, and it's great." So credit to us. One thing that you should know is that we do draw a line from performance. Things that are in general related to just low-level performance, that will always be part of the Magento 2 core. Things related to scalability, the ability to natively work with a MySQL cluster, the job queuing, so that you can process expensive transactions later. That's reserved for Enterprise Edition. And I think it makes sense, right? So those are issues of scalability. We want the platform to scale well for you. However, we think if you're operating at an enterprise level, go ahead and bump up to Enterprise if you can. One of the things, so thinking back to the early days of e-commerce, it was enough. Like your extent of integration was like integrating with a payment provider, which I know is a developing story here. I guess in Serbia, I think there's a lot of cash on delivery here. But with players entering the market like Alibaba, Alipay, I think we'll see that story change rapidly over the next few years. But that was the extent of the integration, right? It was just maybe just calling out to a payment processor and that's it. Now, rest of world, average store has 14 integrations. This was from a massive survey done by Gartner. 14. In their research, they found one that had several hundred external integrations. Back in the days of OS Commerce, the idea of integrating, like trying to build this and hook this into an ERP. I know there are OS Commerce instances out there operating at an enterprise scale, and they do integrate with some enterprise systems. I can't imagine maintaining that. So Magento 1, we saw the emergence of more and more businesses, and not even just enterprise, smaller businesses. They're getting into drop shipping. They're doing all these different things. And the ability of Magento to adapt from the mom and pop shop, just selling a couple bicycles, to businesses having, some really serious, enterprise service buses set up, doing their resource planning, doing customer management. That's a far cry from where we were with OS Commerce. And in Magento, I'd say Magento 1 makes that job not too difficult, but maybe, I'm sure if you've been through some integration projects, you've come up against some rough edges sometimes in Magento. Magento 2, we wanted to really increase the modularity, improve the modularity, so that the surface area of an integration should be pretty small. In other words, an integration shouldn't have to hook all throughout the system just to do its one thing, ideally. And I'd say for the most part we've achieved that. That's what I've heard from developers doing Magento 2 implementations already. We also, in Magento 2, of course, give you some new fun ways of building these integrations. So speaking of which, we have this great plug-in interceptor system. So for the developers in the house, this means every public method is now essentially a consumable event. This is like the most awesome thing ever. It's also pretty terrifying. We know people are going to do some really interesting things with this this sort of level of exposure. But what it does mean is that you now have much better ways to enable your customizations, whether you're changing core functionality or you're adding to core functionality. You have a whole new set of tools to work with. We still have our event system, but we have this interceptor pattern, the plugins that allow you to really get into pretty much anywhere in the application. We have our. I need to kind of change this. So this is an interesting thing when you're a company spokesperson, and you have absolutely zero ability to impact timelines. I have been saying for over a year, quarterly releases, and it is true. When we release something, it will in fact be a quarter. It will be in a quarter of a year. We just don't know which quarter it is. I mean, so if any of you are good at math, you might know that you might be able to say, okay, Magento 2 came out in November. It's December, January, February, March, April. There have been some quarters, and we've yet to have a release. 2.1 will be a big release. And thankfully, yes, it will be coming out. So I'm actually going to go ahead and strike this through. We're committing to regular releases of features. I won't say that they'll be timed every 3 months or so. They may come more quickly. They may not. But really, the gist of it is plan on a few releases per year. And with those releases, you do get a whole ton of new functionality, as well as platform improvements. So underneath, for the developers, because we're using Composer now, we also adopted semantic versioning, which is also an ongoing story that I hope we'll get right here very soon. But essentially, we have the marketing version, so the thing that business owners want to hear about, 2.1, which has these features. Underneath, we have an entirely different versioning system for the platform itself that allows us to make certain changes that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. And all of this is kind of basically all of this is in the interest of you being able to upgrade and upgrade with confidence. And a real key component to that is testing. Found the tester in the room. Who is testing their applications right now? Yep, that's par for the course. That's pretty typical. Those days are over. In Magento 2, you have to cover your code with tests. You should. Well, I mean, no one's gonna kill a bunny if you don't, but they might become very cross with the bunny if you don't. No, you should. Magento 1 was kind of hard to test. Why? Because no one was building testable applications in 2007. I mean, that's the way it was, at least in PHP. Maybe if you were Sebastian Bergman, you were doing it. Everyone else, no. So with Magento 2, we knew from the beginning that we were going to build this. We were going to build in a whole suite of tests so that you know when you write code, you are not breaking core functionality. And the cool thing is, once you cover your code with tests, you can introduce other people's code and know whether you're going to have a breaking change or not. Testing is great stuff. I mean, when I first started out, of course, our manner of testing was like push it to production and see if anyone complains. And then eventually, as Blue Acorn, where I started my Magento career, where as it grew and grew and grew, you know, we had different teams working on different projects. We actually had a QA person on each team, and they're just those neurotic OCD types who just click all the buttons and try to break all the things. But that was part of our, you know, part of our release operations were, you know, okay, I think I'm good. I don't see it breaking. Push it to staging. Let QA check it out, and he or she would just rock and roll through it. Hopefully it's all good, and then it goes to production. Guess what? You still have things break. Testing really helps solve that problem. And if you, by the way, my very dear friend, one of our most outstanding community folks, Vinay Kopp, has a Mage 2 training series called Mage 2 Katas, and it's on YouTube. Absolutely check those out. He is a masterful educator and very knowledgeable, and he's giving his stuff away for the price of free. Although if you want to give him a lot of money, he'll come into your shop and train your developers how to test. One of the things, one of the other stories that we have is who here has a Magento certification? I have actually some die-cut stickers with me for each of the different certification types. So feel free to come up and say hi later, and I'll give them out. I don't have many, but I'll give out as many as I can. Who here has a Magento 2 certification? I better not see a hand. You have a certification? Oh yeah, because you did the train agency thing, right? Yeah. So besides that, so that was our stopgap. We don't have analogs of like the developer and front end and solution specialist trainings for Magento 2 yet, and that's intentional. We actually build those with working knowledge of Magento deployments, like actually maintaining instances, so we know where the rough edges are. So it wasn't until 2010 that Magento, got like me and Alan Storm and Vinay Kopp and a few others at headquarters in LA, and we came up with the certification tests. That was fun. There may have been a few beers consumed as well. So we'll do something similar for Magento 2. We're not ready to do that just yet. There will be certifications. But in the meantime, M2, the Magento 2 Trained Agency Program, we opened it up to solution partners at first, and now it's wide open. So if you want to demonstrate your Magento 2 proficiency, it's a really great way to do it. Why? I'm glad you asked. Because we have, I actually really like it. I prefer it more than to our certification program. Because certification, it's all multiple choice, which is really not how programmers program usually. Normally, we are professionals and we just go to Stack Overflow and copy stuff. Stack Overflow-driven development is a thing. We know it. There is a plugin, I think, for PHP Storm that will like literally pull in. It'll like pull in code from answers on Stack Overflow and just drop it into your application. It probably works. It's very meta. Where was I going with that? Anyway, the Magento 2 trained agency program, the nice thing is you actually have problems to solve. Like we give you course materials and then you have problems to solve. You write the code to solve those problems and then guess what? It's reviewed by our team, like actually by a person who says, oh, that's good, oh, that's not good. And it's iterative, right? So we'll give you feedback and say, no, you can't do that, try again. And then eventually you get it right and you get the badge and it's great. So I am committing that Magento 2 certification will happen. We will start that process this year, but I highly, highly doubt that we'll finish it this year. We also do have classes available that you can take. I'm actually also working on some new training initiatives that hopefully we'll see here in the near future. DevDocs. How many of you knew that we actually have documentation for Magento 2? That's good. So for the rest of you, we have documentation for Magento 2. We've actually demonstrated something that I think is going to change the industry. We found out that if you hire tech writers, you have like 100% more likely chance that documentation will get written. Because in Magento 1, the intent was always to write the documentation, but it's that same classic developer story, you know, I'll write the documentation when we're done. So I would expect full documentation for Magento 1 to be available sometime in November of 2018. DevDocs is an interesting story because that's our tech writing team, and they did something interesting. They taught themselves how to use Git. And so we build, we essentially host all of our documentation on GitHub, which means you as developers, if you go to the documentation and you either don't like it or don't find what you're looking for, you can contribute. Every single page has a link right there. My left, your right. Edit this page on GitHub. And they're quite responsive. Even with several tech writers on staff, even with contributions, and we've had several contributions from the community, there will not be a like 100% complete set of documentation anytime soon. So please do go and check it out and help us out. And in general, I would like to say that the collaboration with the community is dramatically different from how it was even a few years ago. And that's not just because they, you know, give me an open credit card and just say, go out and book trips everywhere. I would say that this company has, if you sit in the meetings with the executive team, if you sit in meetings with the product team, if you sit in meetings with the architects, if you talk with our engineers, you will always hear community come up in those conversations, because it doesn't matter if we make something that we like, we have to make something that works for you and that you use. So that's why you saw us move all of our development to GitHub and then convert it so that we can actually accept pull requests. So Magento 2, when it came out, it had community code. It had community code in it that made it better. And that story will continue for quite some time. I also should mention we have a couple of new announcements. You know, Commerce Order Manager. This is a very high, like big enterprise thing, but it essentially is. It's the only time I ever say this word, omni-channel. This is the omni-channel solution, right? So this is handling the full pipeline of all the different ways that people can purchase and all the different ways that people might want to pick up their products or have them available to them. You remember earlier I said I may not always be the best person to talk about something. I am not the best person to talk to you about Commerce Order Manager, but if you do have an interest, again, right now it's still a very high-end enterprise product. I will get you in touch with the team that helped build that. It was one of the great things we got in our nice divorce from eBay. Did I mention that we're no longer owned by eBay? We're now an independent company. An independent company who gets to do cool stuff like building the enterprise cloud. So we're getting into the cloud business. Our approach is platform as a service, so our approach is not Shopify. We want to make something, we want to take a lot of the questions out. We want people to have one bill to pay all of this stuff. We want people to know that they're working with a stack that we know how to work with as well. And so the driving principle behind cloud, at least for me as a developer, is that you're working with a literal copy of enterprise. It's not special, not different, it's not a cloud version of enterprise, it's enterprise. So you get to work with Magento the way you know how to work with it. And then we just kind of build up and box deployment tools for you. This is kind of a big deal. Right now, it's built for pretty big enterprise clients. We have a second offering that will take this and make it more accessible for stores. I think $100,000 a year revenue and up. It's the guess. Not my product, so I won't commit to it. But essentially, the idea is the same. We really want to take the variability of hosting and content delivery, etc. We want to take all of that stuff, any kind of trials and tribulations that you've had there, we want to remove that. And so we've also got some great partners like New Relic and Blackfire to help. These are tools for you as developers that can help you find bottlenecks, troubleshoot them, and get your store, get your site healthy, up and running. And we're actually also, you should know, like our team is we're working with these vendors to adapt their tools to the e-commerce space. So it's not just, if you've used New Relic, if you've used Blackfire, it's sort of like that, but plus for Magento. And I literally just saw screenshots of the new Relic stuff yesterday. So it's good. So really the question is, what does the community think? Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm out there a lot. And I think in general, so this was the M2 seminar from earlier this year. I love this. You can't probably see at all. Can everyone just come up here and take a look? No. Magento 2 is awesome. So basically, this presentation was sort of like, well, there's this thing, there's this thing, there's this thing. We've got to fix this, we've got to fix this, we've got to fix this. But by the way, Magento 2 is awesome. And that seems to be the feedback that I'm getting, right? So I'm a fairly honest guy. They pay me to be, they pay me to make sure that I say things and you believe what I'm saying. And I figure the best way to do that is just to not bullshit. So, is Magento 2 finished? Like, is it just like, yay, it's awesome, we can't make it any better? Absolutely not. Do we have rough edges, especially in the areas of developer experience? Yes. So we've actually, I can tell you, we've kind of had a little internal pivot of sorts, and we are actually allocating a whole bunch of people and time to developer experience. So you're going to see some of these changes. When 2.1, 2.2 come out, you're going to start to see some of these changes. You can already see some of these things happening, like Alan Kent, our amazing chief architect. We got enough feedback about less versus SaaS in the whole front-end workflow that we're working with the community to implement a whole new workflow for the front end. I don't know many companies that do that quite like we do it. There we go. Now you can see it. Magento 2 is awesome. There are, as I mentioned, some training options. Happy to get you connected with the Magento U team. Also, as I said, and you'll hear more about this in the next month or so, I am working on some new training initiatives to basically put Magento training online in some of the famous online learning vendors so that you can study cheaply and from the comfort of your own room. But there are a whole lot of other people who have to speak today, and they're going to be much more interesting than I am, I promise. But you should know that since we've separated from eBay, our ability to focus, move, in technical terms, get shit done, has really increased quite a bit. And we are now just a 600-person company, no longer part of a 30,000-person behemoth. We all are very interested in your success and in your feedback, good and bad. So please make sure you share that with us. Any questions before I go? I mean, you can find me later, but yes, you.
So I work with a Dutch developer for waiting for a mic. Hi, my name is Michael. I'm with Joel Interactive. We built Magento sites using 1.9, or the latest edition of Magento 4.2.0.
Yep.
And the concern that my team has is moving to 2.0 and not be able to use extensions properly. You know, the extension market is really a huge concern. So could you just address that for us?
Yes. Thank you for asking. Mainly because I totally forgot to put it in my slide. So extensions. This is one of those great things about, well, it was a neat thing about like OS Commerce, but really great in Magento 1. As an agency developer, you know, we're pretty flush with work, or when I was, you know, we're pretty flush with work, so, you know, somebody needs advanced reporting. Well, okay, there's like a $200 extension that probably provides what they need. That's been used by, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens of stores, probably hundreds of stores. So we know the product is good, it has its own dedicated support, and I can literally just take it, drop it in, and it's good. That is supposed to be how extensions work. However, if you've installed extensions for Magento 1, on occasion, you will know that there are some of what we would call dubious quality. So with Magento 2, we have the marketplace. That is the sort of the next, it's like Connect Reimagine. And what we're doing differently is we've turned it into an app store model. So we take some of that money, so we have skin in the game, we host all of the code. So when people submit their extensions, and I know, I'm sorry, I'm taking this on, I'm taking the bike over to Tangent Town, swinging it back this way. So we do static code analysis, code quality, several checks, check for plagiarism, etc., to make sure that the code that makes it in the marketplace is good, really good. And then for some extensions, we actually even do like hands-on checking for sort of a higher level of assurance. So with Magento 2 and with Marketplace, you should expect to find very high quality code. Literally, you should be confident that you can drop in those extensions and they won't break things. Now, if you have custom code, well, it might break. We can't imagine all possible scenarios. But of course, you've covered your custom code with tests. So you'll know if there's an issue. Now, the reason I bring this up is to help answer your question, which is, yeah, what's up with these extensions? And smart extension vendors, and either existing or new extension vendors, this is the time to get into Magento 2. You'll no longer see like 50 different Facebook like button extensions. Like there might be 2. We're not going to confuse people just because you think you have done you built something that's already been built 50 times. Doesn't give you the right to be in the store. We want merchants to not be confused by a dizzying array of options. So now's the time to get your extensions in there. Now, by the way, we have already over 200 extensions in the marketplace, and there's like a backlog of several hundred that we're working through. So in pretty much no time, you should see like 500 or 600 extensions, high quality extensions listed in the marketplace. So a lot of that concern is hopefully mitigated by that. Now, If you have a Magento 1 instance and you've purchased an extension for that, can you take that and put it into Magento 2? No, you can't. We do have code migration tools. So we actually, if you go onto GitHub, under our Magento user, you will see data migration and also some code migration tools. It's not push button like, oh, now this Magento 1 extension is a Magento 2 extension. It does do a lot of the work, just a lot of the repetitive stuff. So, there is a bit of a trade-off. There is some overhead, I guess, in going to Magento 2, but that overhead buys you a lot more in terms of certainty that things are high quality and that they'll work well. Does that kind of get to answer your question? Okay. And again, happy to talk about this as the day goes on. Anyone else have a question? Okay. Seems like I am done.
Okay. Thank you.